Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the podcast Little Girls Aren't Taught This. I'm your host Lydia McCartney, and this week we are going to unpack body image. So just before we do that, something that I want to bring into the podcast is I'm going to pull a little oracle card at the beginning of every session or every podcast. And, I've pulled these cards and set the intention for the podcast, and I just want to share the one that came out today. So these oracle cards are around women's bodies and women's wisdom. So they are very divine, feminine, and they really fit the energy of the podcast, which is exciting. I do love a little oracle card. So the one that came out today is around nurturance and self-care, and it says complete and move on. And it says, it is not possible to get all of the nurturance you need from earthly things alone. Nurture yourself through regular contact with your soul and that which is divine. The ultimate source of nurturance comes from our connection with God. So obviously God can be anything that it means to you. So that's something I'm going to introduce into the podcast episode, and I just thought it was really nice. A really little nice thing to incorporate. So let's get going in terms of body image. So today I really want to unpack body image, and there's so many things I could talk about because, as you guys know, if you do follow me on Instagram, I talk a lot about the relationship with the relationships that women have with their bodies, and body acceptance and body positivity. And the reason why I'm so passionate about talking about it is because I've had a range of struggles myself when it comes to body image. And I, from the age of 14, have had so many struggles, and it's always made me feel like I'm not good enough. So I've always lived my life essentially trapped in my body. And that has always determined who I am, what I do, how I feel about myself, how I show up in certain space. And in a way, it really links back to the first episodes of this podcast when I was talking about objectification and all of those things. So today, the things that I want to touch on in this podcast are, why is body image such a huge issue for women? Because I think it's something that we don't think about, and it's so normalized. Do we actually ever stop and think, why is it the way that it is? So it is literally like an epidemic, because the amount of women that have emotional and psychological issues with their body is honestly astounding. And I think the complexity of body, of a woman's relationship with her body, not only comes between her and her body, but it's also really powerful in terms of relationship with food, relationship with sex, pleasure. There can be huge relationships between body and stored trauma. So your body is like the vessel for a lot of compact things. So the relationship that you have with your body is really loaded and can be quite complex depending on how you navigate that space and what's showing up in that space. And then I just want to give you a few little tips to begin to shift your relationship with your body. And like I said, this is going to be something I do talk about across a few episodes. So today I just want to keep it pretty simple and just help you understand socially why body image has as much power as it does. Because I think for me, once I understood that, it shifted so much, and I was like, oh my days, I did not realize this issue was bigger than me. I didn't realize this issue was so deep rooted, and I also didn't understand the control that was packed into that relationship with my body. So this episode is slightly delayed because, as you all know, I moved into my new place the last week, and I usually release a podcast episode on a Wednesday, but I was just trying my hardest to get this space finished, and I did do it, as you all seen yesterday. I managed to get it all done. So this is the first episode I'm recording in the office with all my lovely plants, and it just feels so nice, to be honest. So I'm just really feeling in a good space recording this. So first part of this podcast, why is it such a huge issue for women? And I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but just simply take a minute now to think about it. Body image and how women feel, and just feel into that in terms of do you understand how much control that has? And do you understand how intricately that sense of control from external institutions and I guess industries comes into play without us having any consciousness? Like, that control is continuously there. So if you just look at diet culture, for example, that is having, in a way, a sense of control over us, isn't it? Because it's constantly feeding into an insecurity. And a book that I'm reading now is called The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, and she essentially explains the beauty myth is tapping into that insecurity with women, and it has created that insecurity around a woman's body and her image, and why that means everything to women. And essentially, when the feminist revolution came around in the end of the 60s, going into the 70s, and women began to get a voice and things began to change and shift, and, you know, legislation came into play that began to make women equal to men, is when the beauty myth, this ideal of beauty, was created. So it was created in magazines such as Playboy. It was very prominent in porn. It was across advertisements. And essentially it shifted the focus on beauty and aesthetics for women. And the reason being is women were stepping into power. And obviously that was causing massive fear for men in patriarchal positions who were at the top of their game. You know, they were working, they had the money coming in, they were essentially the essence of patriarchal systems, which puts women as a lower class. So when you had this revolution, and when you had all these absolutely incredible feminist pioneers coming through who were just campaigning for change, there had to be control gained. And the way that control was gained was using women's bodies and women's appearance to do that. Because part of the revolution and part of the essentially part of the revolution back in that time was sexual liberation for women. And women got a whole host of rights, and, you know, contraception was brought into play, and abortion rights came into play. And essentially women began to have sex to enjoy it, and women began to feel into that sexual liberation. So a part of that happening was, you know, there was that control, and that, I guess, that importance was put in to strip control back from women. So it was like, okay, you're gaining too much control, you're too sexually liberated, you're getting rights, you can go out and work, women don't want to get married early anymore. Okay, how can we get them? How can we get the control back? And it was that, through body image. So I'll just read out a little line or two from this book, which is absolutely incredible. So if anyone feels like they want to read it, it's called The Beauty Myth. But it says, and after the success of the women's movement second wave, the beauty myth was perfected to checkmate power at every level in individual women's lives. So the modern neurosis of life in the female body spread to woman after woman at epidemic rates. So essentially what that is saying is, because the women's movement was successful, the beauty myth was created to regain power, to ensure that women did not become too powerful. And that is when you see things like plastic surgery boom, you see porn boom, Playboy, and you see all of these really sexualized, over-sexualized images of women. However, you've seen them in the sense of look in a certain way. So everything that we see today, it stemmed, this was the beginning, the root of it. And I think for me, when I read that, it honestly shocked me so much, because I was like, wow, that is a form of control that has been held over me since birth, since just me being a woman. That is control within the bigger realms. And this kind of links back to what I was saying in the first episode, but the bigger realms above us and the things that drip feed down are essentially gaining so much control over us through these little subtle things that we see, and we are overloaded with time and time again. And now you add social media on top of that, it's no wonder that so many women have such a negative relationship with their body. And before you've seen this, sexual revolution of women, and you've seen all of these second wave feminist movements coming in that really shifted things. Before that, beauty was not a thing that women or men noticed. If women were beautiful, it wasn't held with the same importance as what it is now. So essentially it was all around, women being able to be, what are their models and their values in terms of being mothers. Like that was the values of society, and that was what was important, because obviously women were stay-at-home mums. So I would just say feel into that a little bit and take note of that, because I know that's something that I've never been aware of. And I think hearing that really landed for me and really shifted things, because it's like every time for me now when I think back, I stood in the mirror and I battled with my body, and this is the same for you. Every time you sit and battle with yourself, and every time you tell yourself that you're not good enough, essentially you're winning, and you're being controlled by that patriarchal structure. You're being controlled by that misogynistic, or those misogynistic ideals that women are less. And every single time we put ourselves down, we are giving them control. We are allowing patriarchy to have control over us. So actually, in terms of us being empowered as women, we are, but we're also being controlled without us realising it. And we're not choosing ourselves, and we're not choosing ourselves as women especially, and we're not choosing ourselves as empowered women every single time we choose, or every single time we look at ourselves and we tell ourselves that we're not good enough, or we compare ourselves, or we just look in the mirror and we just feel disgusted by what we see. So I would just suggest sitting with that, because it's really powerful. Some tips that you can take to begin to shift your relationship with your body. There's so many things when I talk about body image that I could go into, and I will in other episodes, but I think I would suggest looking at it a little bit more expansively in terms of what I've spoken about. So in terms of looking at it with the lens of that control that I said before, and actually understand how that lands for you and how that feels for you, to understand that, to know that that is done by the diet industry, that is done by plastic surgeons, that is done by, everything. It's done by big brands for perfume, it's done by clothing companies, it's done by everything that doesn't even require a link to a woman's body. It is done. It is used, and it is used as a way to keep us at a disconnect with ourselves, because if you begin to connect women back to their body, that is where the power is, and that is where the structure begins to crumble. When women begin to speak up and women begin to feel confident and liberated in their bodies. So the first thing one of my first tips is aim for body neutrality. And what that essentially is let's say body acceptance is too much for you, or even being positive feels like too much, and you look at women, or when you read things about body positivity, or even if you try to look in the mirror and say these affirmations and stuff like that, it just might feel too forced and it might feel too much. And that's okay. And then what may happen is you can actually add resistance. So you can chip away at the relationship between you and your body. If you're forcing it more and you're forcing it to be something that it's not, you can really begin to resent your body and resent yourself for not being able to feel good from the affirmations. So this is stuff I always talk about in terms of, the culture that we're in on social media, and it's not everything is for everybody, and that's okay. So aim for neutrality, and what that means is you step away from the negativity, and you're not going straight to a place of love or acceptance, you're just going to a middle ground. So, okay, you don't love your body. Okay, you don't accept your body. Okay, you may not even like your body, but can you just pull away from that negativity? Can you just pull away from critiquing in a really harmful and rejecting way what you see in the mirror? And getting to that neutral space will mean you are not a lover or a hater. You are just, it is what it is. And you can be striving for more. You will always have your days like anybody does where you don't feel 100%, you don't feel good. And those negative thoughts come back into play, and that's absolutely fine. That's okay. So don't force it. Just feel into it. And if you just want to go to a space where it's neutral, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to go into the mirror and do mirror work and give yourself all the love in the world to your body if right now it feels too forced and it feels too much. The second tip I would say is understand the battle. So for me, my relationship with my body would be different to you guys listening. And I always say this about self-love, every single relationship that a woman has is different. So every time I do the body module in my Divine Transformation program, every single woman in that week will have a different story about their relationship with their body, and they will all have a different background to that story, to where they are now. So some of them may have experienced trauma, some of them may have experienced bad relationships. They've just always been that way for as long as they can remember. And all of these, when you bring all of these collective stories into the space, you understand that there's so many, it's so loaded, like I've already said, and it's also so complex, but it's also very individualistic in terms of how you feel. So understand your battle and go there with it and sit with it and journal about it and like get to the root of it. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and yes, it's not going to be pleasant at times, but I think what's really important is understanding that. So instead of just saying I hate my body, or instead of just being like, yeah, I don't like my body, well, what is that? How does that show up for you? Like, tap into those feelings. What do you feel when you look at yourself in the body, when you look at your body in the mirror? What thoughts come up? Why do they come up? What is it that you don't like about yourself? And I know this sounds a little bit bizarre, because when I talk about body empowerment, it's obviously the opposite, isn't it? It's about looking, and especially when I've just said about body neutrality. However, you can't heal something that you don't understand, because what you will do is you will just heal the surface level stuff, and you will only heal what is in the consciousness. So because we know, and because I've said it's so much deeper than that, it's about going to that space. And I always say, you will always hear me say, you have to learn to dance in the dark to appreciate the light. And this applies for body image. So dancing in the dark is going to the battle, like go to the battle and understand it and work through it. And then what you'll begin to do is connect the dots and begin to piece it back together. And this is what I always do with my clients, especially if I do body empowerment work on one-on-one. I take them right back to understand, okay, why do you feel this way, and what is it that you feel? And in a way, everything with your body is so subconscious that you don't have to think about it. So you actually have to make a conscious effort when you begin to shift towards body acceptance, where I just also think that's really sad that we don't even have to think about it when we are in that space of rejection, because it's just so naturally ingrained within us. We say things in our head about our bodies so naturally that we never truly understand how nasty we can be about our bodies. So when you begin to shift and bring that into the consciousness, it lands differently, and you begin to understand the impact that it's having. Because what we do as women is, we say these things all the time, but it's like in and out. And it's like once it comes in, it's like it doesn't count because it's awesome. We're not saying it. But I always say to people, speak to your body as if it's your best friend, or actually write things down and say things out aloud to yourself that you say to your body. So when I do retreats or I do any kind of workshop with women, I always get them to write their negative self-talk out about their body, and then I get them to swap it with another person, and they have to look that person in the eye and read out what they've said to their face. And every single time you just have women crying because it's so impactful, the things that are said. because it's like you realize once you bring it out of your head and you put it on paper and you write it down and you bring it into the consciousness how negative it is, and you would never speak to anybody else you love like that. So why do you think it's acceptable to speak to yourself like that and have that negative energy stored in your body? Your body knows how you feel. Your body will feel, your body is the storehouse of your emotions. So if you're feeling like really rejectant against your body stores onto that. It knows that you don't love it. So your energy and your connection to your body it's not there. It's not a good one. So it's about building that. So it's about going back to the battle and then working forward to build on that. Tip 3 is see your body more than an appearance, or see your body more than your appearance. And I've spoke about this a lot, but I always say to people, if you put weight on, or you go up a dress size or 2 or 3, what's the worst that's going to happen? Not much. You're going to have to get a new wardrobe. You're not going to feel your best self, obviously. You're not going to feel confident. But is it absolutely life or death consequences? No. What happens if your heart decides it doesn't want to work properly? Or what happens if one of your organs begins to shut down? Or what happens if you lose a leg? Is it life-changing, and is it potentially life or death? And the answer is yes. And this is what I always say to people, like, it's done. Like, we don't get another shot at life if our body decides it doesn't want to work the way it's meant to work, or a dis-ease. So disease, I always say, is dis-ease. It's like, it's that uncomfortability, it's that negative energy, it's that dis-ease within the body. And when we are rejecting our bodies and when we are constantly battling against our body, we are causing disease within ourselves. So if that happens, your story's done. Like, you don't get another rerun on it. Like, you don't get another go at it. Yeah, we spend so much time and energy fucking consumed with what we look like, and we take every single moment that our bodies are healthy and that our bodies are doing the things that they are meant to do, so we can see our children, or so we can go on holiday, or we can just be here for another day on this earth, because we don't get another shot at it. And we take that for granted. And when I began to look at my body like that, I was like, oh my God, it's so much, or I spent so much energy and time consumed about if my bum was big enough and my waist was small enough and what body fat percentage I was, or if I'd gone up a dress size. And the reality is, who gives a shit? Like, nobody, because it's not going to change my life. It's not going to drastically change my life. It may impact me, because again, it comes back down to that control, doesn't it, with body image. And we are constantly striving to be that ideal of beautiful and perfect in the realms of what society deems it. So begin to see your body more as an appearance, and maybe do 3 gratitudes a day around your body, but none of them around appearance. And when you catch yourself being negative about your external body shell, come in with like a positive, but come in with a positive that you can say that relates to how your body's serving you. So if you have a thought that, oh my God, I'm so fat, I look disgusting, take a minute and check yourself on that and be like, okay, but what is my body doing for me today that I'm grateful about? I'm grateful that my body allowed me to exercise today. So shift that focus away from it. And that kind of leads into tip number 4, which is challenge the bullshit. So begin to challenge your own BS. Like, it's not, like I've said, it's not acceptable for us to say the things that we say. It's not acceptable for us to spend so much time consumed trying to be this idea of perfect. It's not acceptable for us to be so nasty about ourselves. It's not acceptable for us to restrict our food. It's not acceptable for us to feel guilty around food. It's not acceptable for us to feel like if we don't fit into these ideals of beautiful, then we're not good enough, we're not worthy enough, and people can treat us the way that they want to treat us. None of it is fucking acceptable. And I think the people who put that on us is ourselves, because we are so conditioned, and it links back to the beauty myth. And like I said before, that when that control was taken back from women, and it's winning, isn't it? It's like these systems that are put in place to keep us small, to keep us less than, they're winning every single time that we find ourselves in that space. But like I said before, it's not the easiest to get out of it, because it's normal to be in that space. It's a lot more difficult to pull away from that. And that's why it's important, because you are the person that is negative about yourself. You are the person that has to challenge the bullshit. So it will be hard, and it will take time, and it may take, doing some coaching or following body positive people on Instagram or whatever feels good for you. But it's about you challenging and checking yourself in those moments where you do notice it. It's not good enough to just walk away after you say you have a thought of, oh my God, I'm so fat and disgusting, or after you battle with yourself about wanting something to eat. It's not acceptable. And I think to begin to fully step into our power and begin to fully shift your relationship with your food, like with your body, it really is about challenging that, because you have two sides of your brain. You have a rational brain, and you will also have the side that's like the chimp brain, and it's very much controlled on emotions and expectations, and like part of it will be around labels and all of these perspectives we have about ourselves. But I always say, like, even if you call yourself fat, like fat, the definition of fat is to have large amounts of excess flesh. So excess, I've called myself fat. People have called me fat in the past year or so. Do I have large amounts of excess flesh? Fucking absolutely not. However, does that word sting? It did at one point, it doesn't now. So I'm deemed as fat. Someone who's 20 stone could be deemed as fat. Someone who's a size 14 could be deemed as fat. You've got girls who are a size 8 saying they're fat. You've got girls with anorexia who the main underlying thing around that, disorder that they have is that they think they're fat. So if we look at fat is used across the full spectrum, across the full range when it comes to women's bodies, and it's used because it's a word that has so much power and impact. When you say fat to someone, it just makes a woman like go inside herself, and it just makes her shrink, it makes her small. And that is why fat is such a commonly used word. So if that's the impact behind the word fat, and there's so much shame based around it, then why the fuck are you saying it every single day about yourself? Or why are you standing in the mirror saying that you're fat? And if you think about it rationally, do you have large amounts of excess being the word, flesh? I probably doubt that you do. And even if you're listening to this and you do the other flip side of that, if we're going to go into language, which I'll do another episode on properly, is the word fat for some people, because it is so negative and it's got so many negative connotations. There's women now, bigger women, who are taking power back in that word. So they no longer want that. They no longer want fat to be associated with such negativity, and they are becoming empowered by saying, yeah, I'm fat, and that's okay. So it's, like I said before, because it's such a loaded space, my days, and it's so different for everybody, it's just about thinking about things with a slightly different lens and perspective, and just really using that to challenge your BS. So that is the end of today's podcast, and I currently have a sex webinar on sale. So body image, like I said before, is so loaded, but one of the big ways it shows up for women is in sex and pleasure. So if you are interested in the webinar, it's literally going to be a 2-hour space. Tickets are £10. I'll put it in the show notes below this episode, and it's just going to be a safe space to talk about all of these things, and talk about like pleasure, and talk about like body image and understanding yourself sexually as a woman. So if you are interested in that is next Saturday at 10 a.m. And thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you for having the patience with it being delayed. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, please share on social media, please download, please leave a review if you listen on Apple Podcast. You know, everything helps. So I am so grateful. And yeah, I will see you next week for another episode of the podcast.